What really is comedy? Even the silliest form of comedy, like slapstick or pratfalls, that kind of Three Stooges comedy. What is funny about that? What makes something really funny is how true it is. When people act silly, when people fall over their own feet, when people throw pies in each other's face, what it really does is it demystifies, it desanctifies the human being. And sometimes we need that. There are times we need to be told how sacred our lives are and how important our mission is and how significant our behavior is on a cosmic level. We need to know that. But on the other hand, we need to know how silly we are, how pathetic we are, how insignificant we are, and how absolutely absurd it is when we take ourselves seriously. You all know Victor Borge? The funniest man, and the funniest thing, as far as I can, in my taste, the funniest thing he ever did is he had an opera singer accompany him, or he was accompanying the opera singer. Now, opera, for those who are into opera is almost sacred. It is such a serious business. People take it very seriously. And what he did, what Victor Borge did, is basically he was so irreverent about the things that people take so seriously. Classical music, opera. And he's got this woman singing and she hits this high note and the camera is on his face and he looks up from the piano and he says, "Oh, shut up!" The blasphemy. So what is comedy? Comedy means when you can laugh at those things that everybody else takes a little too serious. And that is so healthy, so necessary, so vital. And where is it more vital than in a marriage? And what provides more opportunity for comedy than a couple trying to make a life together, male and female? It's absurd. And yet we take ourselves so seriously. Now, when you get up in public and speak, you can put on a pretty good show. It's very easy. Memorize some good lines, you sound intelligent. You tell a couple of good jokes, you sound friendly. You don't talk too long, you sound considerate. And people walk away thinking you're intelligent, friendly, and considerate. They don't know you're a monster. So in public, you can fool the world at least some of the time. So if a person tries to put on airs and to act important in public, it makes a little sense because you could get away with it. It could work. But with your own spouse, who are you trying to kid? It is so funny when a spouse tries to make believe he's important to his wife or that she is important to him. Not after the first week. Give it up. She's got your number. And he's got your number. Might as well relax and have some fun. Stop trying to prove something. It's not going to work. He's seen you without your mask. So it's very, very funny and not at all helpful when we take ourselves seriously, particularly in marriage. But you can't all of a sudden, when you're married, develop a sense of humor about yourself. You got to start earlier. At least that would make it a lot easier. But it's never too late. Whenever you find it necessary, humor is always available because there's good reason to laugh at ourselves. I was once saying this in a class, and I was saying a human being is the most insignificant creature of all of creation. Because every other creature fulfills its purpose consistently. Human beings are the only ones who fail. You ever see a failed donkey? A donkey is always a donkey. He can't fail. He can die, but he can't fail as a donkey. A worm is always a worm. It can't fail. Why isn't a human being always a human being? We're not. Sometimes we're animals. Sometimes we're worms. And sometimes we're angels. Why can't we just be human consistently, like everything else in creation? Water is water, trees are trees. Why can't human beings be human beings? So we're the worst. That's what I was saying in class. And somebody said, but wait a minute. The Torah says that we are the highest of all creation, and that God cares about everything we do, and that human beings are the most intelligent, and that human beings have freedom of choice, and human beings are special. So I said, so what's your question? He said, it's a contradiction. You're saying that human beings are miserable failures and insignificant creatures, but the Torah says we're not. I said, so what's your question? He said, it's a contradiction. It's not a contradiction. When Torah says you are very special, what do you now know? That you're special? Not necessarily. When the Torah says you're special, you now know that the Torah is very kind. Torah is very generous with its evaluation of us, but we know who we are. So it's not a contradiction. Torah should think very highly of us. I hope God thinks highly of us. I hope he's not listening to this. And I hope that we think very highly of others. But that doesn't mean that we should think that way of ourselves. Imagine somebody writes a book. The virtues of being human. All human beings are basically good. Everybody wants to be good. Everybody tries to be good. If they fail, it's not their fault, it's their mother's fault. It's a good book. People should read it. But imagine if that same author writes the same kind of book, but about himself. I really mean well. I try my best. Deep down inside, I'm really good. If I do anything wrong, it's my mother's fault. Who would read this book? Nobody should read that book. So we have, in effect, a double standard. We should believe that people are good, but that doesn't apply to ourselves. We know ourselves too well. So when we say the humor of marriage, we don't mean laughing at the other, we mean laughing at ourselves. Just for the sake of contrast. Take a look at something we were talking about earlier in class. A human being has many layers. We function on many layers. All function comes from the soul. A body has no function. All activity, all attributes, all faculties, all behavior, it all comes from the living soul that is within us. Now, there are those things that are very essential to the soul. And then there are those things that are secondary to the soul, external. For example, a person speaks. Speech is one of the unique talents of a human soul. But at the same time, it's not essential to the soul. In fact, in heaven, souls don't speak. It's very quiet up there. There's no talking in heaven. Souls don't speak. And that's because speaking is such an external activity. It is secondary to the soul, not primary. It is not the essence of the soul. It's called a garment of the soul. Same is true with action. Body can't move or act on its own. The soul has to act. But act is an activity removed from the soul. It's external to the soul. Like skin is external to the brain or to the heart. So it's called a garment. A garment means it's an object that exists besides me, separate from me. So when I say something, when I create words, those words come into existence and they're not me anymore. They were once me. They were once my thoughts. My thoughts were once my feelings. My feelings were once me. But now that I've said it, the words take on an existence of their own. You can put it down on paper, and somebody else can now say those very words. It's called plagiarism, but it happens. And why is that possible? Because speech is not essential to your soul. You create it, and it takes on a life of its own. That's why you have to be careful what you say, because once you've said it, you can't cancel it. And that's why it's called a garment. A garment is not part of the human being who wears it. It's a separate entity. You don't describe a person by what he said, because garments are not a description of their wearer. They may reveal the wearer, but they are not a description of him. And that's why you cannot tell what a person is by the words they say. You can't really tell what a person is by the acts, by what they do. This could be good, it could be bad. Because I can say words that aren't necessarily a reflection of my essence, I can say smart things even when I'm not smart. That's good. It's good to be able to study Torah and say the words, even though you're not holy, you're not smart. And yet you're saying holy words and smart words. Great wisdom, and you're not even wise. Same is true with activities. A person can act kindly, a person can act constructively, a person can act considerately, even though he's not constructive and he's not kind and he's not considerate. And that's very good. That enables us to do more good than we have. That's very good. Of course, the negative side is you can make believe. It's false. It's misleading. It's deceptive. It's manipulative. But that's the nature of a garment. The clothing you wear will either enhance your personality and your being, or it will conceal it and give a false impression. The poor man who puts on a rich suit to fool people, or the rich, the wolf in sheep's clothing. Now we have in the human soul, we also have emotions. Emotions such as love and hate. These are not garments to the soul. This is the soul itself. But what do we mean by soul? What do you mean it is the soul? What it means is this. How do you love? What does it mean to love? What happens when you love? What's going on? What's the mechanics of it? When you speak, you create words. When you act, you create results, changes. What happens when you love? Not when you express love, because then you're back to words again. The emotion itself, what is that? You have an emotion? What is that? What's going on? What's happening? You feel something. What does that mean? What's a feeling? What are you doing when you're emoting? When you're feeling an emotion? Chassidus works like this. Love is not a thing. When you love, you're not doing anything. And that's why no one can take your love and walk off with it like they can walk off with your speech. Because love is not a thing. So before you love, and when you love, nothing has been added to you. There's been no increase. You haven't produced anything at all. You're still just you. Then what is an emotion? An emotion means your heart is a flexible creation, and in its flexibility, it can take on different forms. It molds itself into different forms. So when you're angry, your heart has molded itself into that form called anger. When you love, your heart has formed itself into the shape of love. So what is there now that there wasn't before? Nothing. It's still just your heart. It hasn't put on a new garment. It hasn't attained some kind of a new substance. It's the same heart, but it was round a moment ago, and now it's been squared, like clay. You have a lump of clay shaped like a ball, and then you flatten it on 4 sides or 6 sides, and now it's square. So what's new here? Nothing. It's exactly the same clay. But now it has formed itself into a different shape. So why is an emotion, why is love you and not your garment? Because it doesn't exist separate from you. It's the shape you're in. Only we're talking about your heart. So when you love, your heart has shaped itself, has taken on the form of love. When you're angry, when you hate, your heart has taken on the shape of. So who is angry? You is angry. It's not you have anger. You are angry because you are now in that shape. That's why once the heart takes on a shape, it's so much harder to change it. You can be speaking about a subject for years, and then one day decide, for no particular reason, that's it, you're not talking about that anymore. You're going to talk about something else. And you switch. But with an emotion, you can't do that. If you love somebody for many years, you can't just stop. You got to reshape your heart. That's not easy. And it's not painless. Because it is the shape of your heart, not an object you acquired and are trading in for some other object. So when you love one person and then decide to love another person, you're not switching garments, you're playing with your heart, with the shape of your heart. That's why emotions are called internal, whereas garments are external. However, as close to your heart as emotions are, it's only your heart. Now, what does intelligence mean? What does it mean you know? You study a subject, you don't know it. You read it again, you know it. What happened? What happened? You gained information? That's not intelligence. That's memory. That's memorization. What does it mean that you now know the subject? Here also, knowing is not a garment. And that's why once you know, it's very hard to change your mind, even when you want to. What is knowing? Knowing means your brain has formed itself along these lines. That's what intelligence means. A brain is flexible. Anyway, it's supposed to be. Brains are supposed to be flexible. And when they hear an idea, they form themselves around the idea and take on that shape. And now they know. They got it. In fact, they are it. The brains didn't just acquire some thing, it has taken on a new shape. And now it is wise. This brain is now intelligent. Not it has information. That's a computer. When you learn something, you are now smarter. You are now wiser. You know. It's internal, deeper even than emotions, because the brain is more essential than the heart.
How's an idiot savant classified? Someone who's
No,
full of all this information yet can't do anything with it?
It's classified as a malfunction, right? However, as much as knowledge becomes you, or you become it, and it's internal and personal, unlike the garments, it still is not really you. It's only your brain. Meaning to say that the activity of the brain, which is intelligence, is one of the higher functions of a human soul, but it's not the soul. It's closer. a lot closer to the soul than speech or action, but it's not the soul. And that's why it's possible for a person to say, I am not intelligent. I am not intelligent. Who's I? Obviously, there's a being, there's a person that exists separate from its own intelligence. When you say, I don't love you, who's I? Obviously, there's a me separate from my heart. And I can actually observe my heart, I can observe my mind, and I can make judgment statements about them. So I can say, I'm so stupid. I am so stupid. Or, I'm so bad. Or, I love you so much. Who's talking? It's not the love that's talking. Or when a person says, I understand you. Well, who's talking? It's not the brain. It's a person talking about his brain. I understand. So now, what is the soul itself? We now have the external, speech and actions. We have the internal, emotion and intelligence. But now, what is the soul itself that has internal and external functions? In many instances, Hasidus refers to will as the soul itself. What does it mean when a person wants? A moment ago I didn't want, now I want. What changed? What happened to me? In the heart, before I loved, my heart had a different shape. When I love, my heart takes on the shape of love. In my mind, before I knew the subject, my mind was formed a certain way. Now that I know this subject, my mind has taken on another form. When I want something, I want. Not my head wants, not my heart wants, I want. What does that mean? It means the soul itself has taken on a form, has molded itself around the object of its will. It's so embarrassing when a person's emotions are wrong. You love the wrong person. You hate for no reason. It's embarrassing. Because this is not a garment, this is your heart. When you think you understand and it turns out you don't. When you say you know, but you don't really, it's very embarrassing. But it doesn't compare to wanting what you shouldn't want. That is such a waste of soul. That's such a misuse or abuse of our soul. Because our will, that's the shape of our very soul, not our brain, not our heart, the soul itself. Training a child, raising a child, or a student, or ourselves, we have to put a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus on this primary issue. What do you want? And should you waste your want on that? Knowing what want is, knowing what will is that what you should want? When a child wants the wrong things, it is so painful to the parent to watch. If a kid is not so smart and he tries to learn the alphabet and he can't seem to get the alphabet, parents are devastated. When a child shows traits that are not so pretty, they're jealous, they're selfish, they're dishonest, it shatters the parents. But nothing hurts as much as seeing a child who wants the wrong things and does not want the right things. That is so frightening. If a child doesn't know the alphabet, all right, you put in a couple extra hours, you get him a tutor, you a little, what is that, a tape series? Yeah? Hooked on Phonics, and you fix it. A kid is jealous or whatever, so you discipline him and you tell him, and But if a kid doesn't want, what do you do? A kid doesn't want. He's got no desire for things that are good. And he has a lot of desire and want for all the wrong things. This is very frightening. We're not finished. There is something higher than your will. If you need to say something, you need to make a speech. What's going to produce your speech? Your emotions. If you have something you're excited about, if you have something you feel strongly about, you have something that you're inspired by, you're going to make a good speech. Because your emotions are going to fuel the speech, and your words are going to be meaningful. You're going to say something. What if you don't have an emotion worth talking about? Well, then you go up to the mind, and you ask your mind to propel the emotions. So if you study a subject, you think about it, you see the virtues of it, you understand how important it is, your heart will get excited. So now you've got an emotion. So if the emotions aren't working, who do you call? The brain. If the brain is not working, who do you call? The will. So the Gemara says, if a person wants to study Torah, but he can't decide which part should he study. I mean, there's so many parts to Torah, so many chapters, so many... Where should he begin? The Gemara says, begin where your will is. Study the subject that you want the most, because then you'll understand. So what makes our mind work? The will. Because we want to know. Well, what if you don't want? See, this is where we panic. Because we can't think of who to call. Who do you call? If the heart is not working, you snitch to the mind. If the mind is not working, you snitch to the will. You go above its head. Over its head. But if the will isn't working, who do you call? What do you do? You don't want what you're supposed to want. What do you do? And there must be some kind of authority. There must be something that compels or propels the will, because we see that sometimes you do want. You want. And then the next day, you don't want. What happened? There's something higher than our will. Hasidus actually says that there's a physiological representation of it. It is the air between the brain and the skull. It's there for a reason. It's not like the brain isn't big enough. It should have been a little bigger to fill the skull. No, the air is there for a reason. Because that air is where the higher power, that which controls your will, that's where it resides. In that air. What is this higher power? The higher power is the sense of belonging. Where do you belong? Or another word for it is identity. What do you identify with? This goes even deeper than your will. What do you identify with? Like, for example, if you're sitting in a movie, and it's the most boring movie you've ever seen, and you're literally falling asleep, your eyes are closing, your head is nodding, you're falling asleep, you don't hear a word. And somebody in the movie says the word Jew. It wakes you up. Now, chances are that they're not talking to you. Somebody said Jew, but they're not talking to you. You're not the only Jew in the world. And yet when you hear the word Jew, no matter what the context, you snap to attention. Huh? What? Who's talking to you? But there is nothing more powerful in the English language to a Jew than the word Jew, for all sorts of reasons. It's frightening, it's comforting, it's everything. The word Jew strikes us more deeply than our will, because we want to sleep. You're sitting at this movie, what you want is to sleep. because you're so bored. And yet that word cuts right through everything, and suddenly you're alert. Why is that? Because you identify with that word. It's not just a word, it's you. It's not the shape that your soul takes on. It is your soul. That's you. Much greater than the shape of you. You don't mold yourself around that word. You are that word. And the same is true with your name. Somebody calls your name, it can wake you up from a coma because it reaches to that part of you that isn't added on, and it isn't a shape you take on. It's the real you. When we refer to God, we can refer to Him in many ways. We give Him titles like Creator, Master, Father, Rock. I never understood that one. But that was one of the ways we describe God. He is our rock. And then there are His names. Hashem, Elohim, 7 names. And then there's God Himself. What do we mean when we say, our God? God of Avraham. What does that mean? Good God? Nice God? Big God? No, God of Avraham. How did He become God of Avraham? Isn't He everybody's God? Shouldn't He be everybody's God? God of Avraham means God is identified with Avraham. The whole world refers to God as the God of Israel. What does that mean, the God of Israel? He's the God of the whole world. He's got the whole world in His hands. Why is He the God of Israel? The answer is, of course He has the whole world in His hands, and of course He's the creator of all, and of course He's everybody's God, but He identifies with Israel. He identifies with Avraham. He identifies with Yitzchak. And He identifies with Yaakov. Which is very interesting, and I don't know what the explanation is. He is never called the God of Moses. How come? If anything, rather than call Him the God of Abraham, He should be the God of Moses. But no. That never appears anywhere in the text. And He is not the God of Joseph. How come? What did Joseph do wrong? And He's not the God of David. But He's the God of Abraham. For some reason, God identifies with the patriarchs. So what does it mean to identify? That capacity, the ability to identify, exists in the air above the brain. What does air represent? Freedom of movement. Rocks are hard to move. Water insists on going down. Fire insists on going up. Air has a freedom of movement, which means freedom of choice. Our truest and most real freedom of choice is not in our heart. All of our emotions are influenced. It's not in our mind. All our knowledge is influenced. Except for the rare geniuses. Where do we have real freedom of choice? In our will? Even our will is influenced. The truest freedom of choice that we have is in our identity. I've got a strong example. Mr. Sharansky is raised in communist Russia, indoctrinated, brainwashed in communism. That doesn't work, so they lock him up. They take away his freedom. They take away his clothes. They take away his food. They take away his books. They take away everything to make him a communist. He's not. He is in their jail, in their country, under their influence, in their environment, and he is thinking, I belong in Israel. And there's nothing anybody can do about that. So every other function was interfered with. He can't want what he wants. He can't think what he thinks. He can't love what he loves. He certainly can't say what he wants to say, and he can't do what he wants to do. But no one can tamper with his identity. I am here, I'm stuck here, I'm surrounded by communism, but I don't belong here. I belong in Israel. I am not one of you. I'm somebody else. I'm stuck with you, but I'm not you. And there's no method of brainwashing, of torture, there's nothing that can make a person feel connected to where you want him to feel. He's always connected to where he wants to be connected. In fact, that's how people survive torture. They disconnect. You want to torture me? Sorry, I'm not here. I just left. You can torture my body, but that's not me. That's how they survive. What is marriage? That was instantaneous. If you didn't hear, he said torture. You see how funny marriage is? He said it's going to get really funny later. So what is marriage? Marriage is not so much what you do or say. Marriage is not what you love or hate, because in marriage you love and hate. Marriage is not what you understand. Wise people don't have better marriages. Stupid people don't necessarily have worse marriages. It's not really even what you want that makes the difference in your marriage. Marriage means you're identified. That's what it means. What makes marriage different from best friends? Best friends are not identified with each other. They want each other. They love each other. They understand each other. But they don't identify with each other. Marriage means an identity. My wife. My wife doesn't mean a wife that belongs to me. My wife means the woman I'm identified with. What makes that kind of identity possible? Our free choice. Nothing can interfere with that. Nothing can destroy that. Nothing can tamper with that. It's always at your disposal. You either identify or you don't. It's completely up to you. Now what happens? When you identify with something, that forces your will to get involved. Your will then forces your mind to understand. Your mind then arouses emotions, and you have a complete relationship. What do you do with a child who just doesn't want what is good? What do you do? Punish him? He'll want it even less. You create for the child an identity. And when the child chooses that identity, everything else is going to fall into place. A kid gets into a bad mood. You tell the child he needs to do something, the child says, no, I don't want to. So you try to appeal to the child. Don't you love it when everything goes nicely and when your room is all clean? No. But don't you realize that it makes a lot of sense if your room is clean, you'll be able to find what you need. So if you need a toy, you'll know where it is. But if your room is not clean, then you're going to need a toy. You're not going to be able to find it. I don't care. But if your friends come over and they see your room so messy, what are they going to think of you? I don't know. Where do you go? So you say to the child, look, just go clean up your room. Do it now. I think cleaning up a room is a bad example. But other things. You say, do it now. And the kid says, I don't want to. Now you're down to your last weapon, your last bullet. What do? You refer to the child's identity. You're my child. I'm your mother. When a mother tells you, you got to do it. It's almost like saying, If you don't do what your mother tells you, then who are you? You're not threatening abandonment. You're only hinting at it. You want to be my child? I'm your mother? You got to do this. If the child is identified, everything else will fall into place. So it's important at a very young age to build a child's identity, not his education. The education will come. But first he has to have an identity that he really is merged with. In Yiddish, in the old country, I promised. When an adult would meet a child, they wouldn't ask him his name. They would say, Wemens bist du? Whose are you? Whose child are you? What is your identity? Where do you belong? To whom do you belong? That's ultimately what keeps us Jewish. It's not so much that we always want the right things. And it's not that we're so smart that we always know the right thing. And it's not that our emotions are so pure that we love only God. I don't think so. What keeps us? Identity. You come to a Jew who hasn't stepped into a synagogue in 30 years. Wouldn't eat kosher if it was the only thing left to eat. Hasn't performed a mitzvah that he's aware of. At least not intentionally. And he really has no interest. You say, look, you haven't been in a synagogue all this time. You want to come over? He says, no, I don't want to. And you say, oh, so you're not Jewish anymore. Oh, no. Now you got a fight on your hands. How dare you? Just because I don't keep all your rituals, I'm as Jewish as you are. More. I don't know how that works out, but somehow, I don't know the logic behind it, but that's the reaction. Don't tamper with my identity. You can call me names. Call me bad Jew. Call me lapsed Jew. Call me assimilated Jew. Don't ever tell me I'm not Jewish. Because that hurts me up here, in the air between the brain and the skull. And once that happens, the next day, the guy starts thinking, maybe I do want to go to the synagogue. Because once you've stimulated that identity, all of a sudden the will starts to kick in. And then all of a sudden it's starting to make sense to him, after all, Jewish for 30 years and haven't gone into a synagogue, that don't make no sense. I really should go. So you've set the whole operation into motion from the top, from the identity. A marriage is an identity. It's an amazing identity. Of course, your mother is your identity. Your family of origin is an identity. But you didn't choose that one. You were born with it. The amazing thing with marriage is you meet a total stranger and you stand under a shmata together and all of a sudden, this is your identity. That's an amazing thing. It's an awesome thing. And it's so real. In many, many cases, once you're married, you are more strongly identified with your spouse than with your mother or father. Certainly sisters and brothers. That's why it's so bad when you take your wife home to your parents and all of a sudden she doesn't exist because you're home now. This is your family and she can stay if she wants. But this is your family. That is so bad. That is not the way you treat a marriage. It's the opposite. When a daughter or a son comes home to the parents and says, I don't like my spouse anymore, I want to come home, parents are supposed to say, you don't belong here. You belong with your spouse. Because that identity is deeper and stronger than your parental connection. It's an amazing thing. Now, how funny is it when in fact we are married, which means we have this most incredible identification which we ourselves chose and created in this miraculous development. And then we treat it as if it's the most insignificant thing in our lives. That is funny. Why is it funny to make fun of a wife? Because it's so inappropriate. To be light-headed or to be light about a wife is so backwards, it's so opposite of what is true that it's funny. It's like Victor Borge is saying to the opera star, "Oh, shut up." It's funny. He has another guest who comes out, and they're going to play something on the piano. And he asks him, "What do you want to play?" And he tells him some concerto. And he turns to the audience and he says, "Don't worry, it won't take long. Not if it's up to me." The irreverence, the blasphemy of it is so funny. So when a person makes fun of his wife, it's hilarious. Because this is the most sacred thing in your life, and you're treating it the exact opposite way. That is comedy. The absurdity of it makes it funny. I'll prove it to you. A guy comes out on stage, and he says, "Take my wife, please." It's very funny. But what if you thought he meant it? Now all of a sudden it's not funny, it's uncomfortable, and get me out of here. The man's weird. I don't want his wife. You see, if it wasn't for the absurdity of it, it would be a horrible thing. The guy says, no, I'm serious. That's not funny. What's funny is, of course, nobody can take his wife. So when he says, "Take my wife, please," that's so funny. But if he starts to mean it, he's a sicko. It's not funny anymore. The practical application of this whole thing. God gives us obligations that are way above our heads. We are not at all qualified for the job that God gives us. He expects us to be godly. That's funny. He doesn't say that to angels. He says that to us. That's funny. God expects us to fix the world. That's funny. We're the ones who messed it up. And he wants us to fix it? That's very funny. God wants us to be virtuous. Now, is that not funny? God wants us to be married. That's funny. Because with all of our shtick and with all of our hang-ups, we are the least qualified for marriage. There are birds. I got to tell you this. In Costa Rica, there are birds that marry for life. And they live 80 years. And if the mate dies, they never take another mate. They are fit for marriage. Yeah, I know. Marriage is for the birds. These birds know how to be married. God wants us to be married. It's funny. So, what does it take to be married? One of the important ingredients, we must realize the absurdity of it. We cannot come along and say, "Look, I know how to be married, you don't. That's the problem. I do everything right. You are making mistakes. That's the problem." You can't be doing everything right. You can't. You're a human being. And although God expects us to be married, you're supposed to laugh at that, not take it seriously. God expects me to be good at marriage? That's a great compliment, but undeserved. So if we're going to be married, there has to be a comedy. There has to be a sense of humor. We must constantly be aware of the absurdity of it. A petty, selfish, indulgent stingy creature should share his entire life with somebody else. Right. This is a great plan. Good idea. God must think more of us. He must have some impression of us that is divine, because he gives us too much credit. So as soon as you start taking yourself seriously in marriage, the marriage is in trouble. The person who feels, I'm not getting what I deserve in this marriage. Don't say that out loud. And don't start a conversation on that subject. Somebody might suggest that you're getting more than you deserve. It's not a good topic. Don't go there. Why would a person feel, I'm not getting what I deserve? Why would he feel that? Because he thinks he's doing everything right. That's too funny. We have to laugh at ourselves and really mean it. We don't deserve anything. Nothing. You marry a person who had a perfectly good life without you, and now they owe you. That's ridiculous. They owe you nothing. After all I did for her, I deserve. You don't deserve anything. For being barely human, you don't get medals. You didn't hurt her. You never cheated on her. You gave her some of the money. That's it. Now she owes you. Don't go there. Don't go there. Somebody once came to a man and said, I would like to make a match between your daughter and my son. And the girl's father said, why should she marry your son? He said, my son? My son is a very honest boy. He says, yeah. And my son is intelligent. He went to school. He says, yeah. He said, and my son is religious. He doesn't sin. He behaves himself. He's moral. He said, yeah. And he went on like this. And finally, the girl's father said, so there's no reason for her not to marry him. Now give me a reason why she should marry him. What have you just told me? You told me why she should marry him? Why? Because he won't beat her, he won't lie to her. That's not a reason to marry him. There are reasons why she should not refuse to marry him. But I still haven't heard a reason why should she want to marry him. So what qualities does anybody have that would make someone want to marry you? None. It's not worth it. Whatever qualities you have, it's not worth marrying. Say, oh, I married him for his sense of humor. Hire him. It's cheaper. Don't marry someone for his sense of humor. If a person has a sense of humor, you are able to marry him. How do you marry someone without a sense of humor? But that's not a reason to marry him. So what reason do we have to marry who we marry? Don't even try to answer the question. There is no reason. God arranges it. You only think you choose. Because when you stop and think, why did I marry her? You can't remember, can you? Because you never knew. There was never a reason. It's every match is made in heaven. That's why you married who you marry. And then you're going to turn around and say, hey, I deserve better than this. We don't. I get no respect. Yeah, probably not. Why should you? Well, then I can't take this, and I can't stand this. I can't put up with this. Why not? What's wrong? You don't get respect. What's wrong with that? You're supposed to get respect? Where did that come from? You need respect? Where did that come from?
So when people get married, and then to get divorced, it was a wrong decision that people made and not God?
In the case of divorce, was it a wrong decision? Not necessarily. If the relationship had become destructive, if the relationship was threatening, maybe your sanity. Now we can argue it shouldn't threaten your sanity. There's no reason for it to threaten your sanity. But if it is, then you got to get out. We're talking about human beings. And human beings can't always be what they should be. And that's why God invented divorce. Since we can't always be what we should be, there are times when we have to stop the marriage. But before we get to that point where we can't go on anymore, we have to smooth the path with humor. But humor doesn't mean laughing at somebody else. It means laughing at ourselves. And is there good reason to laugh at ourselves? Absolutely. Absolutely. Now here's a strange thing. You get into a big fight with your wife or with your husband. Angry, really angry, nasty. Then you go to the club or to the mall and you get together with your friends and you start describing what happened and you start to crack up. You can't believe what I said to him. You should have been there. Oh, did I give it to him? Wait a minute. When it happened, you were very serious. You were very nasty. You thought you had to retaliate. You must. Now you're talking to a friend and you're saying, what was that? You should have seen me. Boy, did I give it to him. What are you laughing at? Because it's funny. Because it is funny. But why couldn't you have that humor at home where you need it? When you get together with your friend, there it's inappropriate. It's not funny what you did to your husband. And your friend shouldn't laugh. But when you do it to your husband, you should crack up with your husband. This is funny. Look what we're doing. We're out of our minds. You're my wife. What am I doing? So let's bring back the comedy of marriage. There is nothing so funny as a man and a woman trying to be married. But don't joke about it outside the house. Joke about it inside the house where it belongs. Laugh at yourselves, at yourself, trying to be good in a marriage, because it's got to be funny. And if it's funny, it's lovable. You're lovable. When you're not funny, you're not lovable. When you can't laugh at yourself and you can't see how absurd your behavior is, you're not lovable. You can't blame anybody for not loving you. A person who doesn't laugh at himself is not comfortable to be with, even for your own spouse, for your own children. If you can't make fun of yourself, somebody else will. So let's go back to the comedy. We have, on the one hand, the incredible identification called marriage. I'll give you an example. I've used it many times. Two friends grow up together, do everything together. They're inseparable. They're Siamese twins. They would do anything for each other. They have done everything for each other. For 45 years, they are the best of friends. Now they're on a boat, a Titanic, and the boat is sinking. And everybody's panicked. And one of the friends notices a life raft. He runs for it. He jumps into it, and he is safe. All of a sudden he thinks, whoa, where's my friend? They got separated, and he forgot about his friend. He'll never forgive himself. How could he? But everybody else would say, look, we understand. You panicked. Panicked. You thought you were drowning, so you forgot your friend. We understand. Wasn't intentional. You panicked. Now imagine there's a husband and wife on board. They've only been married for a month. They barely know each other. They still think that the other is wonderful. And the boat is going down. And the husband sees a life raft. And he jumps on it and he saves himself. And then he thinks, oh my, where's my wife? Nobody will forgive him. Nobody will say, oh, we understand, you panicked. You panicked and left your wife? It's not acceptable. It's not reasonable. So, but wait, but I panicked. Well, you would have panicked too. Yes, you panic and you forget your best friend of 45 years, but you cannot forget your wife of 1 month. That's the nature of marriage. It's an incredible identification. And yet look at how we treat it. That's funny. That's funny. We finally got to the highest part of our soul and we treat it with less respect than our speeches. Didn't I tell you? But I said. What you said is suddenly more important than your identity? This is so backwards. This is like telling the greatest opera star to just shut up. It's absurd. It's funny. And when we catch ourselves doing that, we really should crack up. If God entrusts us with this, as funny as it sounds, we must be capable of somehow pulling it off. Because God really means it. He really wants us to be married, not just playing at it. There's nothing else in Torah, no commandment, no mitzvah, no holiness that justifies erasing God's name. Nothing. Except when a husband and wife have grown apart and the Torah wants to bring them back together again. Then God says, erase my name if it'll bring peace between a husband and wife. It's also helpful if we take other people's marriages with that kind of awe and sanctity. When you hear a friend of yours putting down their spouse, don't allow it. Don't allow it. It's like listening to blasphemy. Person says, I hate my wife, I hate my husband. You can't listen to that. It's like people saying, I hate God. Or I hate Jews. You can't listen to that. Don't let it. Remind them that it's sacred and ask them to speak appropriately about a sacred subject. It'll reflect back on your own marriage, and your own marriage will become more sacred. And the more sacred you know your marriage is, the more funny it'll be when you don't treat it appropriately. So laugh at yourself and worship the marriage, not the other way around. Don't worship yourself and laugh at marriage. That's funny because it's so untrue. It's so the opposite of life.